Hey everyone, I am Jessica with Event Marketer, and I'm excited to be here today with our partners from the Experiential Marketing Measurement Coalition, also known as the EMMC, to talk about a topic that impacts marketers on all sides of the industry, and that is sponsorship activations and measuring sponsorship activations. This is a space that B2B and consumer marketers both play in equally, and while it might be one of the OGs of experiential as a discipline, right up there with sampling, we think it's also one of the fastest evolving and perhaps the most sophisticated in terms of what sponsorship looks like today versus even just a few years ago. So first, let me introduce our panelist. Dax Kallner is the founder and board president of the EMMC. Hey, Dax, it's good to have you.
Hi,
Hi.
nice to be here.
Excellent. And Marco Lopez is also a board member of the EMMC and founder and event sponsorship strategist at OnSite, which I want to learn a little bit more about in just a moment. But hello, Marco. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Great. So, Dex, I'm going to have you kick us off. And I want to know what we're talking about when we talk about sponsorship activation, just as a foundational definition. And when I said just a moment ago that it's kind of the OG discipline, I'm really thinking about those early days of experiential when marketers would pay X amount of dollars to have their logo on that outfield sign. Maybe that gave them permission to hand out samples and engage with attendees at a sporting event. But I'm wondering if you can set the stage for us and tell us what sponsorship activation actually means and how it's a little bit different from other types of sponsorships.
Definitely. Thank you for that. So I think, sponsorship, as you just said, it could be as simple as logo, signage, almost treating the event in which you're sponsoring as an advertising space. We want to get a message across. We want to build awareness, and those have valid reasons for existing, but that's not exactly what we're talking about here. I think activation is a key word. It is where the brand decides to do something maybe more immersive or interactive, where it could be giving out samples, but it could be much deeper than that. It could be a fully developed brand experience that people are going through to get a deeper sense of the brand and interact potentially with brand ambassadors. And I think that's the space that's really interesting and rich, and there's lots of opportunities to capture data across those. And so I think that's where I would like to shape this conversation around those sponsorship activations, because again, I think there's so much richness that can be had from a data standpoint, and the investments can be quite significant. So you want to make sure you're getting good data out of it.
Yeah, Marco, have you seen kind of this evolution of sponsorship activation in your time in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think to build on what Dax was saying, I think there is the sponsorship, but also is taking that intellectual property and how it breaks down into all the different spaces, right? And yes, there's the media portion of it, and there's that broadcast portion of it that captures those signage moments or so on. And as Dax saying, let's focus on this other part, right? The analog, what I call it, the unplugged assets in which we interact and we truly connect with that consumer. That activation, I think, has evolved, and that's where creativity flourishes also, right? Because you want to really connect with that consumer at every step of the way. I almost see it very much similar to now that I've been a little bit more into the tech side and so on, is as a UX experience. So I see the parallels of us thinking like, okay, from the moment they're going to walk in to the moment they're going to sit down to the moment they're going to get to the fan fest or to the hospitality area or so on, all those little moments, or even before the event or after the event, that intellectual property has to really come through, but it has to connect completely with the brand and the intent that we have with that consumer.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Even just thinking about your sponsorship activation or your sponsorship as an IP, which is, I think, kind of relatively new thinking in the past several years. That's really helped drive some of that evolution. I wonder if we could pivot a little bit and look at it from a brand's perspective and what's driving that decision to invest in these type of events today. Dax, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Interestingly, I'm working on a project relevant to this right now. I'm working with a major global automotive brand on how they activate the brand in different spaces. And they're considering, for example, they've traditionally gone to auto shows, and that is a very typical, exhibit environment within a trade show setting. It may have a consumer angle to it, but it's kind of the way things have always been done. They're realizing, I think, that in order to reach their targeted consumers, they need to take the brand elsewhere. And so they're evaluating what other events are out there that may have a level of cultural relevance. So I think that's a part of the decision factor. Is it a good fit culturally for the brand? Does it feel like the brand is a natural fit into the environment? But the big one and most obvious is, will the audience be there? And and as you think about an event that you're going to bring your brand to, you have to consider, you're inviting people into the environment, and you want those to be the people that you want to reach. You want them to be your potential customers, obviously, and then sometimes even existing customers. We just did for this automotive brand an assessment of the audience that came to their exhibit, their activation at a sponsored event. And it turned out that a very large percentage of those people were existing customers of that brand. And I thought that was fascinating because it said to us, this is not just about prospecting. It is also about loyalty, advocacy, strengthening relationships with an existing customer base who are attracted to the brand because they already own the brand. They're already in the family. And so that the understanding who the audience is and getting access to an audience that you wouldn't get access to through other means, and you could have a deeper level of engagement with, I think is a reason to decide to go. I'll just end by saying that when it comes to measurement, part of our analysis is the show itself, the event itself. Is it a good fit? Is it the right audience? And that is part of the data, I think, that we would collect for any sponsored event to make sure it is a good fit. And are they delivering the right people to the experience that we're seeking out? So that's my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, Marco, same. Are you seeing brands being driven to sponsor events with the same kind of idea as they were a few years ago? Has that changed or evolved?
I mean, I think it depends on how sophisticated the brand is when it comes to their objectives and their focus, right? I think that sometimes it could be a legacy, sponsorship that has been there for a long time. And I would say, does it still work for them, right? I think that at the center of everything, yes, when we think about the people and the attendance has to be there, right? That right demographic or the right target audience. There's really four things, every event, doesn't matter how small, at a Costco retail sampling event or as huge as the World Cup, right? They usually have them here because it's like, that's the four things, right? From events connect people with, brands, right? And at moments, that particular moment in time, in places, so it's got to be a physical space for us and experiential, right? And to enjoy that message or to enjoy that experience. And I think those four things, if we can track them, has so much richness when it comes to measurement. So when the decision making has to be there, that filter is always good to have. Does it have our target audience? Is it in the right place where they will feel welcome, where our brand will be able to activate? Is it during the right period of time? And is the right message going to be welcome during that period of time, or is it going to be too noisy, etc.? Right. So all those things, and if those are checks, then yes, let's go for it.
Yeah, that's a great. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please. Yeah, please.
Sorry, just one addition, which is a lot of sponsorships have been in the past ego-driven. And I really think it's important for us to take ego out of sponsorship. And what I mean by that is it can be very sexy to sponsor something. And I think we have to make the right decisions based on real data about whether the brand should be there, not because we think it makes us look cool as a brand. I mean, maybe we want to be cool, but that's only a small part of it.
Yeah.
I got that.
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Jessica. Please just no, go ahead. I'm sure that we're probably going to have say the same thing. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh gosh. Right. Yes. Well, so it's a great segue to my next question, which is about misconceptions about the value of a sponsorship activation. Because when you do bring up that kind of ego element of it, you certainly can go down the wrong path if that's what's driving you down your interest in a particular property or sponsorship or sports platform or whatever it is. So I wondered if you guys could both talk about the misconceptions about the value of sponsorship and kind of where things can go right and things can go wrong.
Marco, you start.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that's been probably the one of the biggest discussions that we always have in the industry, right? It's that all of a sudden it comes down to like, hey, you know, the CEO or the CMO talk to so and so, and all of a sudden it's like we're stuck with this sponsorship, right? And you need to make it work. At the end, you can probably make it work, right? But those are the things that are difficult to do, because then the renewal comes and you really don't have a skin in the game, and maybe the immersiveness of truly understanding the property, understanding the brand ethos and everything else is probably not going to be there. It's just more of that transactional piece that was done and good, right? But I think, you know, you see other sponsorships that have been done for a long time, and you truly see that the camaraderie and the partnership, and that's when I think it's such a great opportunity to extract the value of that sponsorship. I've been in both ends, right? I've been in the end of saying, wow, what a great way to continue to extract value. You know, working on the agency side for Coca-Cola for many years, you know, managing the Mexican national team and so on. But one of the ones that we truly took even further was the World Cup Trophy Tour, right? And, you know, such a global and massive property within World Cup, and then taking it all the way down to a retail level. I mean, Coke does an amazing job doing this, right? But then you go to the other way, right? Where, you know, sometimes, and I don't want to mention that other brand, but, you know, we were spending maybe what usually is the norm of $3 to $1, right? $3 of actual activation to $1 that you spend on that sponsorship. You know, you were spending probably like 10 cents, so not extracting any value of the actual sponsorship. So those are the big problems that we can run into, and not and have it there dormant in a way. That's, I don't know if you have other.
Yeah.
I mean, from a misconception standpoint, I would add that I think there is a perception potentially that if we sponsor an event, it will have incredible effect on the brand. And it's not enough to just sponsor. You have to have a relevant connection, I think, to the event. And you have to deliver something from an activation standpoint that people want to do and care about. And so I think it really requires you to think about the asset, think about the sponsored asset, and say, what in our DNA connects us to this? I'll give one example. Like, I used to work with American Express on their sponsorship activation at US Open. And American Express in tennis, you know, that's a connection that has been created, but it has been made around a passion point of an audience that Amex wants to appeal to. And then on site, it was creating activations that were experiential in nature and left people feeling really great about Amex. It wasn't enough to have the Amex logo on the net of the US Open. It's, you know, you have to do more than that. You have to find ways to deliver a relevant experience that's enjoyable for people that are coming to the US Open. And so I think it has to, in my view, it has to go beyond just we stick our logo on something. It has to feel right, and it has to have an activity that makes sense to the audience, in my view.
One more thing I think that I'd love to add here is that, you know, at the field level, if we bring it down, right, you're going to activate these huge IP. Sometimes even the at that level, there's other sponsorships that happen at a very local level, right? And those sponsorships sometimes can be, you know, I used to get at Petco, you know, people come in, hey, but this is free. And I'm like, well, free is not free because it requires resources. And I think that that is something that we need to put in place also. I instituted a filter that took subjectivity away from choosing a sponsorship, right? It was truly, we would go through the filter and, did it reach it? It was people, pets, places, performance, right? People, did it hit our target audience? Pets, will they feel comfortable and not anxious and so on? So NASCAR, probably not a good idea for pets, right? And places, welcoming, we talked a little bit about it, and performance, will they be able to give us that? But in performance also comes that part of resources, right? And resources have people, time, money. Free, again, if we go back to that point, is I would need to put in time. I would need to put in maybe tchotchkes. There's still time that I would have to give into these potential opportunity that it may not be a priority amongst all the other pieces of that filter. So it was super cool to actually, for my team at the local level, to embrace it and say, you know what, actually, good idea. Then they became a very good, filter and source of great sponsorships that truly deliver on the objectives that we wanted to get to.
Cool.
Yeah, Marco, you've really kind of answered this question, but I want to throw it out to both you and Dax in terms of how brands can evaluate these types of sponsorship activation experiences. And you've both talked a little bit about that already, but I wonder, for the brand marketer that's listening in and is considering a sponsorship program that's heavy on activation, what is that evaluation criteria, if you can break it down just a little bit more? And Marco, this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about Onsite and what it does in the context of evaluating sponsorship activations and thinking about, how am I going to measure this against our KPIs and goals?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. I started Onsite with that particular piece in mind, right? What is it that I'm going to be tracking, right? And having had the opportunity to work on, again, on the agency side, on the brand side, on the media side, and across those pieces, I always was fascinated at the fact that our KPIs were all over the place. But my first thing that I wanted to do was a quick recap, because the decision making, if again in the field level, if we're doing so many events, then how can we learn right away in order to optimize the next event? We usually wait, up to the 80th event and say, oh, by the way, Tuesdays were better than Wednesdays, and we could have had maybe 2 or 1 less brand ambassador next year, and we're all okay with it. And that to me is banana. So now when we can have real-time data that can provide us those areas, those levers of optimization, then we can start to change. Hey, let's try Wednesdays instead of Tuesdays. Let's try 1 less brand ambassadors and so on. But all that comes with strategy, and that strategy is similar to the filter that I was sharing right now, right? The people, does it have the right target audience? And I think that those are the main KPIs that you want to keep in place, right? Is it going to reach your target audience? So don't think about it in attendance levels only, but maybe 100% of the event was attended, but 80% of that was your target audience. That's a huge win still, right? So that part, the place, the market where you're going to be, is it your priority market? Is it does it fit with your corporate strategy? And then when it comes to objectives of the brand, I think that one big misconception, going back a little bit to that, is that sometimes we in our industry shoot ourselves in the foot by saying, well, how many sales can we get to? And sometimes it's not necessarily about that performance. So we need to look at the funnel in the perspective of what we want to do. And I might geek out a little bit more here, sometimes, but when it comes to the event, we cannot see it completely linear, and it's more of a multi-dimensional, by day, by demographics, by objectives, etc. So KPIs, is it the objective? Is it, trial? Is it awareness? Is it, truly the performance of collecting data or collecting leads? And I think having all those things in place will then, dictate what type of activation you will have, right? Mm-hmm. What type of assets are you going to activate? So if everything is around trial, but all your assets scream awareness, then you're never going to meet your goal, right? So those are the levers that you need to pull. Going back to on-site, is that was kind of the big aha moment. Identifying that we don't have a standardized measurement, standardized metrics. And that was probably one of the things that really wrecked my brain, because media does it, but we don't. And having had a chance to work at Facebook not so long ago, when we gave back a report to our clients, millions of dollars spent. It was, did we reach a target audience? During what period of time, with what frequency, and what was the budget? And that's it. We're not over here creating huge, spreadsheets and everything of research projects. So I think at the end is getting back to the basics, but in that multidimensionality. So that was kind of the big ethos of thinking about what I'm trying to build, is standardized measurement with real-time reporting.
Yeah.
Please continue to geek away, because we just can't geek out enough when it comes to event measurement. We need all the geekiness. So please, yes, Dax, continue.
Yes, I'm going to slightly disagree with Marco, but maybe not in principle, which is I do think that there are some standard KPIs that can be applied to a sponsorship activation. I think of it as in two broad buckets. Let's geek out. One of them is the performance of the activation, and the second bucket is the impact of the activation. So let's talk about each of those. If I'm thinking about the performance of the activation, I want to know, for example, are we attracting the right number of the right people into the activation? That doesn't mean it's the right number of the right people. It's not as many people as possible. Because as Marco said, if the sponsorship asset, if the event that you're going to, if only 20% of the audience is your profile target, then it doesn't make sense to attract everybody. It makes sense to selectively attract the people that you want to bring into your experience, and you need to understand, are you doing that? That can be done through surveying, asking some questions, demographic or otherwise. By the way, on demographics, I've been moving slightly away from traditional demographics of things like age and gender and even income levels, although that can be questionable, to what I would call a values graphic or value graphics model, meaning that I want people to come into the environment that care about the things that matter to the brand. And so their values are aligned. And I think that's a very interesting, rich territory that isn't constrained by demographic buckets, essentially. Anyway, the right number of the right people. That's
geeking out. See, this is when the richness of the geekiness
going
comes
into
in.
the weeds. Right. Okay. Right. So that's number one. Then I think within the environment, are they doing the things that they should be doing, and how long are they doing them? So, for example, like one of my least favorite terms in event measurement is dwell time. And the reason I don't like it is because more time doesn't always mean a better experience. So what I try to do is establish time targets. So if we have multiple different experience zones, let's say within the activation, I want to know how long should people spend in those experience zones? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? And then I track time spent versus the targets that we have established. And the reason that is so important is because we need to get people through the environment. We need people to do the thing, and then for the next person to do the thing. And you can't do that if people are spending an hour when they should be spending 5 minutes. And so I really look at those, and therefore an hour of dwell time is actually having a negative impact on the experience versus a positive impact. So I look at time spent, and I look at people's journey through the environment. I look at their interactions with brand ambassadors and how well those interactions are going. Are the brand ambassadors delivering the right experience within the environment? Because it isn't just setting up an activation and letting it happen, or as if there was no human interaction, and that has to be a part of it. And then the last thing that I typically look at from a performance standpoint is, did we deliver value to the visitor? And that's another survey type question that makes sure that we're delivering a good experience through their eyes. Was it a good use of my time? Nobody wants to come and have their time wasted, but they may derive value in a different way than the next person. So we ask them a general question: was this a good value for your time spent in the activation? And I look at all of those from a performance standpoint, do an evaluation of, did it perform against what we hoped it would do? Now, the bigger one for me is impact. We talked about the performance of the activation. The question now is, what is the actual impact on the brand and on the business? And so how I like to do that, and this is, connected to what the EMMC has just published in our playbook for sustainability measure. I'm sorry, playbook for sponsorship measurement. We just did a sustainability one too. All right, sponsorship measurement playbook. The impact metrics are connected to brand perception, brand changes in brand perception, and brand performance. So you want to know, do people like the brand more? Yes, that's a brand affinity. But also, let's take that a level deeper. What are the attributes of the brand that are most important? We want to ask people, do you perceive the brand as this, this, and this? Do you perceive them as approachable or premium or good value or innovative? Like, you determine what those key attributes are, and you dig deep with the audience to understand, are we changing people's minds to make them feel a certain way about your brand? That's an impact measure. You've changed how they think. That's an impact on how they think or feel about the brand. And then the next one is almost always connected to business or commercial or revenue type sales impact. It's very difficult to, unless you're literally selling products at the activation, it's difficult to directly connect what happens at the activation to a sale. But what you can do is understand, are you changing people's likelihood to purchase? You can ask them questions. Are you capturing leads potentially, as Marco has said, that could be followed up on for product purchase? Are you capturing what products people are interested in? All of those are key data points that can be used to project a potential sales impact off of the activation. And so I don't generally deal in converted sales, because that could happen much later, or it could be a lifetime customer value. And there are many touch points that impact how someone buys from a brand. But what I can do is predict what the potential sales are based on these key indicators, these buying signals that we get from talking to people at the experience. And so those are impact metrics that I think are very important. All right, so now I've geeked out on that for a while.
but I think, I'm glad that we agree on this, because I think that there is a fundamental piece that on the methodology that I'm proposing, that it's on why the standardization is so important. And the reason why is because if you have these, billion-pound gorilla on the side of media with standardized measurement, and metrics that cannot find attribution to the things that we're doing, then we will continue to be a black box. And if we treat our events as a research project, then we will be only looking at that universe. The idea that I'm proposing is having, completely adapting a standardized measurement to the multidimensionality of our events that can happen on a hospitality area, on a fan fest, on the stadium, at the retail level, and so on. But at the same time, once that information is quantified, once it's digitized, then the methodology will have that attribution, when matched with the rest of the marketing mix, truly say, hey, now we can find attribution, because it will have apples to apples. Otherwise, we have, and it's nothing wrong around identifying more information around the consumer. That to me is research, or actually that in the sense of scholarly results, that's research. The idea is data analytics in order to deliver attribution eventually, and truly connect that analog information that right now doesn't exist.
Well, I'm going to geek out on both of you for just a moment, because I have my own little data point that I want to share. Because before we move on, We are in the throes of finalizing our annual event track study, and that's going to be out in October. And this year, we discovered in the process of pulling this research study together that the majority of consumer marketers, so 51%, so just over half, for the first time in the history of our event track study, which is about a decade-long study, reported that leads and data collection are the most important metrics when they're measuring their events, which actually displaced awareness and engagement at a consumer event. So in fact, it's the number one metric across all of the sectors that we looked at. So that includes CPG, IT, medical, financial, and retail. So leads, data collection, and meetings generated as another criteria were all rated as the most important B2C metrics to event teams heading into next year, which speaks directly to the evolution of how these events are being used and should be being used based on everything you both have just said. And I think the answer to the question of why it's important for brands to evolve how they measure sponsorships is becoming obvious in the context of this data point and everything that you've just said, because having good data gets you good results, gets you budgets, gets you support, all those good things. But I wondered if you could both talk about how your teams can kind of elevate all of that to the stakeholder level around measurement of sponsorship activations and how you can change those conversations, because quite often event marketers don't quite have that seat at the table to have that strategic conversation and talk about the power of their events in that same language and context that you're talking about, Marco, when you have to talk about digital and advertising and everything else. So I don't know who wants to jump in on that first.
I can start. I mean, I think sponsorship activations, like most event marketing initiatives, are expensive. And so because there's an expense associated with it, it's going to be scrutinized. And the scrutiny is coming from people who are holding budget purse strings within corporate environments. And they need to, and are now asking the tough questions for, why are we spending all this money? And the measurement has to answer that question to a degree. I think there is a leap of faith to some degree, because you're not going to get the scale that you would get off of a digital campaign necessarily, but the depth of the interaction that you can have with the audience should prove the case through data that you're delivering not just potential sales, but real deep brand advocacy, brand love, things that really do matter from a long-term relationship standpoint with that customer, which I do think is a reason that experiential wins over things like digital ads or banner ads. I mean, I think we all know that intuitively, probably anyone listening to this, but now we need data. And so these data points are meant to give us ammunition or evidence to support why the investment in this type of a channel is worthwhile. The second reason is it also, as you kind of hinted at, it elevates the role of the event planner or event strategist at the level of other advertising and marketing strategy people. And so if you're trying to be more strategic in your organization, or you're trying to advance your career, you're trying to get a seat at the table with the CMO, the data is the secret way to get in there, because you can actually use those data to have really elevated conversations that are at the same level of the other marketing constituents within the organization. And then the third reason, and I think any event marketer knows this, but it has to be communicated to stakeholders, is we need to know what's working and what needs work. So if we know what's working, we can invest more in the things that are working, and we can get better results. If we through measurement identify that there are issues or challenges, we need to address those too. So it brings an objectivity to the assessment that ultimately means, hopefully, better and better results over time. So if you do consistent measurement of activations time and time again, each time you do those measurements, you say, what didn't work and what do we need to affect or change in order to get better results next time? You implement those changes, you should see the results improving over time. And I think that brings some rigor and science into this process of continuous improvement. So those are three key factors, I think, that are reasons to invest some time and energy into this area.
Marco, anything to add to that? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think to me, I see the parallels, and this is why probably I'm so about this and about experiential, because I see the parallels that I had when I was in multicultural marketing, and I always see that those parallels because we always have to prove ourselves, right? When I was in multicultural, I needed to prove the fact that there are Latinos, there are Blacks, and there are Asians that actually purchase stuff, right? And it's a huge demographic and the growth and so on, right? So I always had to prove that. In order to do that, I needed to understand clearly and be immersive into the rest of the ecosystem of marketing of the general market in order to make sure that I share my point of view, right? When it came to experiential, same thing. I think that we need to understand what's on the other side, understand truly how media works in order for us to then find our footing. And it's not about fighting for the dollars. In some cases you do, but at the end of the day is how the ecosystem will work together, because we are an extension and we're within the ecosystem of marketing. So if we are not equipped to understand and to the rest of the marketing mix, we will always be, we will not have that seat at the table. And that's probably why I feel so. Going back to the point that Dax was making about objectives and bringing more data into it, I think it's more than data. It's more about that strategic thinking, understanding around it, and then back it up with data-driven results, right? In order to then, really, force yourself into that area, because what we do is truly valuable. And when the CEO and CMO come in to that hospitality event to, handle the business with other stakeholders, that is the place that you want to make sure you shine and that deal is made. So I think that, we need to look at the entire multidimensionality of I always talk about this because it's not linear. It's not one single event. It's the entire ecosystem of our place or where we activate. But understanding the other side and the understanding truly how everything works, we will have a much better. And we're no strangers to that. I mean, at the end of the day, we plan, we activate, we report. So again, similar to multicultural, we plan, we activate, we're researchers, we're kind of like mini CMOs. So that's why asking our community in experiential marketing to take another step to learning, it's not going to be that difficult because we already are used to it.
Let me add one thing that I was just thinking about as you were speaking, which is oftentimes the event planner, when they create an activation, they kind of set it up, they get everything right, they put the people in there, they put the brand ambassadors, and then they make sure that it works the way it's meant to work. But what I think they're missing sometimes is direct access to the customer or to the prospect. You are on site, literally face to face with the most important audience to the brand. And one of the tools that I use in stakeholder conversations is I will say, I talked to a few customers who were at this activation, and here's what they had to say. That is so powerful to getting people's attention within the organization and also illustrating key points that I'm hoping to make when it comes to investing in this. This one customer said, I wish you guys had more of this and this and this. And it's so powerful. And sometimes we forget, like, the audience is right there. Talk to them, get a sense of who they are, get inside their brains, and then bring that back with you. In addition to the kind of more quantitative data, that stuff, those anecdotal or qualitative elements are super helpful as well.
And I think, you mentioned no time at one point, and right now that discussion with the consumer, right? It triggers something to me because when it goes hand in hand with the expense of the event, right? And how expensive it could be, right? I think that the time factor is crucial here, and it's crucial on quantifying the value of that. So when I think of an impression, and we've talked about this before, Dax and I at length, an impression on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, any of them, it's accounted for someone that scrolled and saw the logo in 1/4 of a second, 13th of a millisecond. That's one second is 13th of a millisecond. Is the blink of an eye. And there's studies to reflect, and scholarly studies that reflect the fact that you can capture that look. But obviously their universe is much larger. In our events, in our domain, it's not a 13th of a millisecond. It's not even a minute. It's minutes. It's half hours. It's hours. And that deepened connection with that target audience, that's where the value is. So I want to change that narrative to also understand again what the other side is and what they offer, which is at scale, as Dax said. But here it's in depth, right? And how much more connectivity we can have to strengthen that brand love and to eventually have incrementality on that brand activity.
We have time for one more question. I'm going to make it a two-parter though, and I want to focus a little bit on sports because we're heading into some big sports seasons. We've got FIFA World Cup. We're heading into an LA Olympics not too far in the distant future, in the close distant future. So wondering how brand teams should prepare to measure the efficacy of activating at these very important, very high profile global stages and properties, but also in the context of thinking about how we have evolved, because in the IEG days, there was, that was kind of considered a standard. Is there a new set of standards? You both have talked about a lot of great ways to measure impact, but when the stage is that large, are there some different considerations? Marco, do you want to kick us off?
Sadly, there are not a whole lot of new standards, unfortunately. I was just at a conference in sponsorships, and unfortunately, I see a consistent use of that methodology that is truly, a little subjective. And it's like, should we measure for, something that is just so subjective? And I think that it's important to really bring data-driven KPIs into the fold. I think what they did have right was, separating the media side of things from the analog side of things, the tangible versus the intangible, and drawing a little bit of that distinction, because there are metrics on that end, and that's how many sponsorships are being valued, right? So I think that, from a valuation perspective on both ends, is it worth for me to spend my, precious brand dollars on a sponsorship just based on the media value of it, or or not? Or is it, from the property standpoint, is it worth for me? Is my property worth that much, based on the media value? So I think that we need to understand that when you're going to activate, yes, the media portion of it is going to be huge, especially with these, global events. But if we bring it down to the activation level at the local level, then what are those areas? And to me, I think it's getting back to the basics here of your target audience, the place, the objective, and so on. That's always going to be there, but be consistent. I think that's one of the. If I was to send a message, be rigorous. If you're gonna do it for all. If not, then you're not gonna be able to find in one single event with one research project what it's gonna tell you for the rest of them. It's just not. So I think that if anything, be rigorous, and if you're gonna track something, just track the most basic things. With that, you have enormous amount of insights that you can start to draw, and you don't even have to go further than that at a minimum. So I think that could be something, and yeah, just make sure that they're retail with retail, FanFest with FanFest, hospitality with hospitality, and that rigor in itself will, give you the right insights.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I actually don't think it's that different for sports activations, sponsorship activations versus others. I think you can apply a similar methodology, similar kind of metrics, and as Marco has said, maybe separating out the potential media value or exposure value of a large scale sports sponsorship and saying that's kind of its own thing. and that needs its own distinct evaluation because of the incredible awareness and reach you can get through that. But from an activation standpoint, you're still creating a brand experience. You want to invite the right people into it. You want to change perceptions of the brand. You want to maybe give them something to try, make them think about how this brand relates to who they are, connect to passion points. I mean, again, it's everything we've been talking about to this point, I think applies to a sports activation, just like any other activation.
But I do think the threat has to be there from. I mean, this goes without saying, but just make sure the threat has to be there on that creative approach and brand message, from the billboard itself to the incredible advertising that is going to happen, all the way to how we're going to express that at that physical level. And I think not a lot of people give us so much credit around the creativity that goes into everything that we do at that live experience, and it's sort of amazing when you come in and make something so intangible and touchable and smelled and feel and everything. That is not going to happen in a 30th of a second.
That's
I can
true.
tell you that.
Cool.
Well said, and a great way to end the conversation. I want to thank you both for your experience and your insights on this incredibly important topic. Sponsorship activations, high budget, high stakes, high impact, needs to be measured, must be measured. So I think Event Marketer, we're in our second year as EMMC partners. And so, we share a passion about keeping this conversation moving forward. We believe that measurement is the rising tide that lifts all the boats in experiential. So we hope you will check out the resources that the EMMC has for you at eventmeasurement.org. We hope you will visit eventmarketer.com for all the industry intel and great measurement practices from others, from your peers. And please watch for more conversations at Event Marketer and on LinkedIn with our partners at the EMMC. We're going to tackle sustainability next. So thank you both for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care.
Great to see you, Jessica. Thank you, Dax.
You too.
Bye-bye.